Welcome to the Changing Rhythms podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Rebecca Cortés. This podcast explores life's changing rhythms, and this season is all about parenthood. This is part 2 of our episode on expectations in parenthood. Be sure to listen to part 1 before you jump in. So some of the things you said felt like a natural segue to our next topic on this subject, the needs of the child and the parent, because you talked about having a set or not having a set dinner time, but maybe if you had end at work at the same time every day, you guys would have had that. So let's talk more about needs of children and expectations around that. And then also what our personal time as a parent alone, but also time together with that child and relationship with others, play dates and the like at this stage for us. What were your expectations and how did that play out?
I will say I did not expect to have personal time, and I did not have personal time. Again, maybe if I had expected it, I would have planned for it, or been intentional about having it, but I didn't really expect to have personal time. And so that was not really something um, that was a regular part of my life when Jacob was growing up.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, maybe once every few months, I would ask my mom to watch him so I could go do something or go do nothing. But that was definitely the exception, not the rule. It was not something that I made sure happened regularly. I
Right.
didn't. Um, but I do think that parents do need to have regular personal time. And that's not to say, I mean, you know what that looks like for you. Some parents need like 20 minutes every day. Some parents need like one night a week. I mean, you know what you need, but everyone needs it to some degree,
Mm-hmm.
because you need that time where you're not responsible for anything or anyone other than yourself.
Yeah.
So, but I never, I never planned for that because at the time, I didn't realize how important that was
Mm-hmm.
and that it really was a necessity. It wasn't just something nice to have.
Yeah. What would you say? Why is it so important?
It helps you to remember who you are as a person, that you are, even though you're someone's parent, you were someone before you were their parent, and you're going to be someone once they're an adult and doing whatever it is that they're doing. Um, and so you can lose yourself if you don't, you
Yeah.
know. Um, and then it gives you kind of a release. For example, if let's say you like painting, maybe in your free time, um, that's what you do, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think when you don't have it, you can. I won't say you will, but you could become resentful because all you keep thinking is all of the things that you're not doing or how you wish you could still do X, Y, and Z, you
Right.
know. So I think it helps you to not be resentful of the sacrifices that you're making for your family. Um,
I totally agree. Yeah. Um, and it's hard. I don't know. You'd have to tell me when it's more difficult to do that because for me, it was really difficult when B was a lot younger, when she was newborn, to step away. It was difficult then because
mhm.
she was so dependent on me. But then, as she's gotten a little bit more independent and having, nice long naps during the day, then I've been able to step away more. So for a while, I was doing like every Monday morning, I go to a coffee shop and just grab my planner and my books and whatever I need to kind of plan for my week and refresh myself a bit before returning home. And she gets up from her nap. So she didn't even know I was gone, but she was able to stay there with her dad. And that was kind of that personal time for me to connect with myself and be who I am apart from anyone meeting me. Um, and I've since stopped that, not because I've stopped pursuing personal time, but I've been doing it in other ways. just as pandemic restrictions change. Because I don't really want to sit inside the coffee shop right now. And I don't really want to sit outside the coffee shop right now. Depends on the weather, right?
Mm-hmm.
Point being, I'm still pursuing that in other ways, but I agree it's so important. But yeah, what would you say? Does it get to be just as important as that newborn phase again in another phase that you get that personal time, or what's that trajectory like?
I think it's important all of the time,
Mm,
just because the challenges of parenting change constantly, and so the one when they're a newborn, they're dependent upon you, right? And so
right.
that's a challenge, having someone who needs you all of the time. But then when they're, let's say, 3, you know, they're starting to form their own ideas about what they will and won't do, and how they feel about certain things, and they can voice their opinions, whether you like them or not, and trying to navigate their them developing their personality and you not wanting to squash that, but then balancing the discipline, because there are certain things, talking about foundation, if you don't set the expectation and the tone from a very early age, it gets away from you really quickly and you can't correct that.
Right.
Very difficult to correct that. And so you may feel like you're fighting with your toddler, you know, every day about whatever. And so you still need that time, because you don't want to argue with a little person about why they can't wear, a Batman costume to school that day. And some
Sure.
parents will say, well, I'll just let them wear it. If that's what you want to do, okay. But if that's not what you want to do, then that's going to be a battle, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think it just changes the what they need and your response to it, and the level of stress, because then the older they become, then now there are now outside influences that you now have to try to combat against,
Hmm.
And so I don't think it ever gets easier, it just gets different.
That's a really
It's
important point. Yeah.
yeah. And so you always need it, because the challenge that you face is different.
Wow. I have got to intentionally make that a part of my expectations for parenting. Um, and I think you're absolutely right. And again, continue to remind me of that truth, please, as we go. Um,
Will do.
so yeah, with B, I'm trying to be consistent with getting my personal time, and having a spouse does make that easier. And I'm grateful for Tim and his participation in that. And what I've noticed over the months is that when I don't consistently get that time for myself, I'm more likely to be mad at Tim, as if it's his fault that I didn't take the time for myself. Like, I want you to do more, but he's not doing any less than he always has. I just haven't taken that time for myself. So it's important it's become really important for me to have clarity on that, and not get mad at everybody around me for not taking care of myself.
Mhm.
And I imagine it'll stay just as important, like you said. So when it comes to the needs of children and parents and time together, do you have any thoughts about those expectations and how that's played out?
Um, I don't think that I had any particular expectations. Um, I guess because it was just Jacob and I from very early on. We just were together. If I wasn't at work, I was pretty much with Jacob. Um, and I feel like it was time well spent. I feel like I got to know him and he got to know me, and we laugh a lot. We have very similar senses of humor. Um, and I think that it laid the groundwork for us to be able to talk as he got older. Not that he tells me everything, but I still feel like there was a fairly open line of communication, but that's not going to happen when they get older if it wasn't happening when they were younger. And it's not going to happen for the serious things if it didn't happen for the lighter things,
Mm.
And so I think time spent with your children is just as important as the time you spend alone, because it lets them know that they are important to you, you know, and whether you're playing or you're watching a movie or you're talking or whatever it is, it's letting them know that they're safe with you,
Yeah.
you know. And so I think, again, and to me, time together, there has to be talking. Like, if you're both in the same room and you're on your respective device and there's been an hour and you haven't said anything, you're not spending any time together.
Mm-hmm.
However, if they're looking at something and they come show it to you and you talk about that, that is time together. So
Yeah.
it's not saying that you have to be talking the entire time, but there has to be some kind of interaction fairly regularly for you to consider, for me to consider that time spent together.
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay. Not every second has to be filled with conversation, but I would say, to be in a room with your child and there not to be any communication. And again, we're not talking about them playing, and you're just with them watching them. That's still time together, because at some point they're going to bring whatever they're playing over to you to
Right.
show you so that you can interact with it, whatever. But just being in the same room, if you could do the exact same thing in a different part of the house, then you're not spending time together, even if you're in the same
Mm.
room. There has to be some type of interaction.
Yeah. I'm just soaking up all this wisdom, Bethany, because I can just see, the various activities that we have going on and put them in those camps of time spent really together and times not so much spent together. And with B right now, balancing my personal time and our time together, a big part of how I'm trying to do that is the nature of my work. So in part, I became a wellness coach so that I have the flexibility um, to move things around and navigate my personal time and my work time and my time with B, in these early years for her, and whatever siblings she might have. And it's been really interesting because I've said before, I don't want her to know that I have a job. And I just assure you that that's just for a season, because at some point she's going to have to understand I have other things I need to do in addition to loving and playing with you all day long. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't want her to become too, dependent on that expectation that I'm going to be available to her at every moment, and then really struggle when I'm not. So all those things I'm considering. But when it comes to our time together, she has been doing that very thing, playing by herself a little bit and then running over to show us the book or the toy, whatever the thing is. And there's this one book right now that she keeps bringing to me several times a day to read. And even if my hands are full because I'm like in the kitchen washing dishes or something, she'll hold it up to me and like open it to a page and just hold
Mm-hmm.
it so I can read it. And she'll just giggle and laugh because she knows what I'm going to say, but she
Mm-hmm.
wants me to say it. And so we're interacting, even though it doesn't feel like an ideal situation to me. And sometimes I put the pressure on myself, like, oh, this isn't good because she wants me to read to her and I'm washing dishes, but she's having a great time opening
Mm-hmm.
the book and letting me participate from the sink. Um, and so I'm kind of learning to understand her perspective. Hopefully I'm understanding it, of what feels like time together and time well spent.
Mm-hmm.
Um, And B doesn't have any devices of her own. So, she's not at that stage where we could sit side by side and not talk to each other. But even if I take a moment to post something for coaching work and I bring her into my lap so she can see what I'm doing, she'll start to dance to whatever music is playing on the post and, things like that. And this is how I'm kind of introducing her to mommy does these things sometimes. This is called work. And you can look at it and it won't take too long, but it's got to happen sometimes. And just kind of easing her into that expectation. So by no means is this a perfect process. And it's like every day I'm trying to figure out the balance for that day. And sometimes it looks like, well, we're just going to skip the work thing right now because B is in need of some extra attention. Or it's the opposite. Like, B, I want you to go say hi to daddy over there while I do this. I need to focus. But I really receive what you're saying. And I want to apply that wisdom to the expectations I set for us as we pursue time together going forward. Yeah. So we're getting to the end here. Let's talk about fatigue. So how much rest is needed as a parent, and how much rest do you get? What were your expectations around that, and what happened?
I think in terms of rest, my expectations were similar to yours, which is you're not going to get a lot of rest. And it was pretty accurate. Because again, being a single parent and a teacher is just very time consuming. And so, yeah, I just did not get a lot of rest. Although I always needed more, you know. And as hard as it is, and I'm saying this as someone who did not take the time necessary, it definitely will begin to affect you mentally, physically. And so even as hard as it may be, you do have to try to find time to rest. I think that's why, like, I didn't go out a lot because, again, priorities, right? I can go out with people or I can stay home and take a nap, you know? And
Yeah.
so it was like, yeah, other things just kind of fell way to the bottom of the list. But I think if you don't prioritize it, you're going to be tired a lot, especially if you don't have consistent in home partnering, whether that's partnering from a family member, a spouse. If you don't have that and you don't kind of make time for yourself to have some downtime, this kind of goes back with the personal time. You
Yeah.
are going to be tired all of the time. You're going to be run down all of the time. And I think it will begin to affect your time with your kid, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because even though you're there with them, they may want to play and you're like, well, mommy's tired. Can we do this instead? So you're still going to spend time, but maybe it won't be the best time because you're really too tired to have the best time. And again, it's better than not doing anything at all. But, you know, maybe you guys going outside to play would have been better time. But I'm too tired for that. So let's just read a book and, be quiet.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I definitely have those moments where I'm like, I know B wants to do all of this and I just don't have it in me. So, and even though, you and I are parents who had their child sleep for more time in the night than a lot of people do, I think the tiredness is still real, right? We still
Mm-hmm.
experience that a lot of the time. I can't imagine what it would be like if B didn't sleep all night.
Right.
But still, the fatigue that comes with parenting, it has been present every time that I even think about it. So how much rest being needed, I don't know how to answer that more than what you're going to get. That's what I expect
Right.
for parenting. And how much you get, I think what we're talking about kind of reveals that it depends a lot on how you prioritize it.
Mm-hmm.
So when it comes to those days where I'm really exhausted and B is looking to do the very most for playtime, I'm trying to find ways to engage her without allowing her to think that my energy resources are unlimited. So yeah, sometimes I'll lay on the floor next to her with her toys and her books and just tell her, mommy's tired. You can bring that to me. I'm not going to chase you right now, things like that. And she seems to be generally on board with it. If she protests, she gets over it quickly because she sees that I'm not moving. But the fatigue is really real. And I would just ask you about getting assistance from others, like you mentioned, partnering with someone in your household or that you bring into your household. How do you expect that to work? And how does it work well for you as a parent, or did it work well?
It really varies, depending upon your your support system, right? Like some people don't they literally don't have anyone to depend upon. Maybe they live in a city by themselves and so they don't have anyone. And I think a lot of parents are very hesitant to trust too much of anyone around their child, especially a younger child, a child who cannot necessarily tell you if something has happened that shouldn't have happened, you know. And so I think there's an ideal situation, but I don't know how many people have an ideal situation. I did not have the ideal situation, but I did have a better situation than some. So I was a single parent. I did move back home with my mom for maybe 2 years when Jacob was younger. And so, not that I ever asked her to be responsible for Jacob. Like I always made sure he was bathed, or I made sure he was fed, or she was never responsible for him, but she was an extra set of ears, or an extra set of eyes. And so that was helpful in and of itself. When I went back to school, she would put him to bed for me. She'd pick him up, or one of my sisters would pick him up, and they would make sure he got put to bed. So I did have that assistance, and I realized that everyone does not have that. Um, and so again, that's I don't feel like there's really a blanket answer for that,
Yeah.
right? Because it just depends on who you have available to you, how often they're available, how much help do you need. So that just varies. But what I would say, which I didn't do as often as I probably could have, is if you do have that support system, that it's okay to actually ask them for help,
Yeah.
you know, because I didn't want to feel like I was not being responsible for him, or I was trying to kind of place the responsibility onto someone else. I didn't ask for help very much. Like I felt like, okay, I'm actually in school. And so it's okay to ask for help now. But any other time, if I'm here, you know, it might have been okay for me to say, hey, can you watch him so I can take a nap? But I never
Yeah.
did that, because it's just like, I'm here. Why would I ask someone to do something? You know,
Yeah.
but it's okay. Even if you're there, if you need a moment and you have that person or people there who are willing to give you that moment, then it's okay to ask for it.
I think that's so wise. And it's something I'm still learning to put into practice. I think that because of my experience so far in life, I really struggle to allow myself to depend on others in those kinds of ways, because they might be there this time, but they might not be there next time, even if they say they will. So essentially, I struggle to trust people to be available or present in the ways they say they will. So that it's difficult for me to ask for that assistance, even when I'm extremely tired. But I do agree that it's important to do it. And so I'm trying to learn that lesson. And the expectation that I held and that I generally hold is always that I can do more than I really can, more than is humanly possible. I just have this idea for some reason. But I'm coming to terms with the fact that I'll run out of energy, I'll run out of steam and resources before I finish what I've set out to do, more often than not, as a parent. And so, making that plan and then adjusting it to sort of scale back to a little more reasonable place and expectation, and then also bringing others in to help me accomplish it, whether it be parenting specifically, or like keeping the home in order, or instructing B as she grows and starts to, be interested and curious to learn things, like preschool things. Yeah. So I'm working on it, but I am so excited to have your wisdom and your experience to encourage me.
Yeah. I would just say also though, like you say you think you can do more than you can,
Mm-hmm.
and it's because you can actually do it, right? But it probably wouldn't be good for you to do it. Like you're you can get that whole list of things done, but you might be run down when you get it done. You might be cranky when you get it done. You might realize that it wasn't a good use of your time. And so it's like, yes, you can do those things, but should you do those things? Is it really going to have the intended outcome? And I think as parents, we can kind of forget, if I do all of these things, is it going to have the intended outcome? And that's kind of for anything with your child. And again, this is in retrospect, because I guarantee you, most of the time, I was not having this thought in the moment. Right. But even like if you buy your kids something, should you buy it? Is it going to have the intended outcome? You know, and just a lot of things that we do as parents, is it going to have the outcome that you want? Like if you buy your kid a toy, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you buy your kid a toy every time, you might be thinking, oh, it makes them happy. But is it making them grateful? Is
Mm.
it making them mindful of how they spend money? Is it making them realize that they don't have to have things to be like there are bigger picture things that you probably want to teach your kid. Is this going to have that desired outcome?
Right. Such big, important things to consider, especially when you're facing parental fatigue,
Mhm.
because you're going to want to make that decision that feels good for everybody right now because you're tired.
Mhm.
And if that's how it has to be today, that's how it has to be. But I definitely want to grow in setting expectations for myself and for my daughter that will serve us well in the future, not just in this moment. So very good points. So we're wrapping up this topic of expectations in parenthood. And the last thing we want to talk about is not having a guidebook for all these things. So how do we deal with things like getting and giving unsolicited advice around parenting, comparing ourselves to other parents or other families, and getting things right versus getting things wrong? Like we've talked about, we have experience with both. So what are your thoughts on those things? Unsolicited advice, other comparison to others, and getting things right or wrong?
I think the easiest one to deal with is the comparing to other families' parents, because they're not your family, right?
Yeah.
So everything is not equal, everything is not the same. And so, how can you compare two things that are not the same? So, be kind to yourself, be kind to the other family, because sometimes, we tend to think, oh, when you compare yourself, you're looking at how much better that other person is. But sometimes we think how much better we are than, that other family. And it's like, again, everything is not the same. You don't
Right.
have the exact same situations. And so don't compare it.
Yeah.
Don't evaluate yourself or your family based on another one. And don't evaluate another one based on how you would do things,
Mm-hmm.
because even though you may not agree with what they do, you know, you don't know the circumstances that have led them to that place. And I'll
Right.
give you an example. This happened actually yesterday. So the acoustics in my house are really strange. Like you can be outside and it sounds like you're like right in the same room with me. I don't know
Hmm.
why I can hear things so clearly. So, but I had the TV off and I was reading something. I was in the living room and I heard someone yelling at their kid and I heard a sound. It sounded like the kid got hit. I don't know because I didn't see it. I just heard it. And so the person is yelling at the kid and the kid starts crying. And so I can hear that it's a little kid,
Mm.
like maybe like around 3. They sound very young. And so my first thought is I feel so bad for that kid because what the adult was saying was very hurtful,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And beyond that, all I did was pray for them because instead of thinking of what a terrible parent that person is, which they may or may not be, I don't know, but I don't know where they are.
Yeah.
They might be so very stressed out. And while that's definitely the wrong way to handle it, that's, that is how they handled it, you
Right.
know. And so I just prayed for them and I prayed for the kid because I knew enough to know that I didn't know what was going on in that person's life. I
Mm-hmm.
knew enough to know that that was a negative situation for that child, but I couldn't say, oh, what a horrible parent,
Yeah.
because I don't know everything that led up to the part that I heard,
Right.
and I don't
Right.
know how long whatever was happening had been happening, you know, excuse me. And so, again, but if I compared, I could easily say, oh, well, I never did that with Jacob. And it's like, who does that help? That didn't help anyone,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah, so that to me, that's the easiest one is just don't do it. Don't compare because you don't know what's going on in someone else's life, family, whatever,
I
so that it
agree.
looks like they're better or worse than you are.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the easy one. Getting it right, getting it wrong, give yourself grace. You're going to get things wrong. You just are, because we're not perfect. I think it helps to admit to our children, definitely, that we're not perfect and to apologize if we get it wrong. And even if it's something that happened months or years, if that's when you learn that you did it wrong, then that's when you need to apologize. And it doesn't make you any less of a parent. It doesn't make you any less of an authority, but it, I don't know, to me, it shows that you love your child. If you can tell them you were wrong and not
Right.
make excuses for it, just you're wrong. You got it wrong and you're
Mm-hmm.
sorry, you know?
I agree.
Yeah. But that one sometimes is easier said than done. But I still think it needs to be done. So the last one to me is a little harder, giving or getting unsolicited advice. Like for me, if you don't ask me, I'm probably not going to say anything just because you didn't ask me, you know. And getting unsolicited advice, I think I've mastered the smile and nod. Just, I don't have to accept it like, okay. And just, if I don't respond, maybe you'll stop talking. And that's
Yeah.
kind of how I handle that.
Yeah, it's a tough thing because a lot of times when I receive, I should say not receive, but when I hear unsolicited advice, because I don't always receive it, but when I hear it, I know that person means well. I know that they're trying to be helpful in a lot of the situations that comes up, but um, it is hard sometimes to take it because of what you said before about us being in different situations. For the same reasons you can't compare yourself, it won't be helpful to compare yourself to another parent or family. Unsolicited advice frequently comes within that perspective, as if we're on the same field, as if we're in the same situation. And I do appreciate the encouragement and the concern. And I think smiling and nodding is a great way to handle it. For me, during this pandemic, being a new mom, a lot of that advice has come via text message. And so the smile and nod has been translated into a change of subject in the conversation. And that's been fine too. But on the other hand, I really do appreciate knowing when someone offers advice that clearly came from a place where they didn't understand my situation, but I can see that they're concerned. I appreciate knowing that this is a person who, if I really was at a loss for someone to talk to in a parenting struggle, I'm sure they would listen, or at least, be willing to hear me talk. Whether they listen well, I don't know. It depends on the person, but it's not all bad. I've come to have a perspective of really appreciating where they're coming from. And then with giving advice unsolicited, having been in a situation where I'm a childcare provider for other people's children, it's a really sensitive thing. Like, this is I'm a person they've hired to take care of their child. But the moment I say, have you thought about trying this? It can feel pretty bad sometimes. Like, who are you to tell me? Like, you think that you know better than me? And I'm adding attitude to the situation, but it's not necessarily like that. But it's kind of a delicate relationship between the childcare provider and the parent. And so I'm grateful for my experience so far providing care for other people's children, because it gives me pause to consider the other person's perspective when they're offering me that kind of advice. Or when I'm in a situation where I can offer advice to a parent, I'll just ask. Like, if they say, oh, I've got to figure out something to address this problem. If I'm in a situation where I have some advice I could offer, I'll just ask, hey, if you ever want my advice about that, or do you want advice about that? I have some ideas, I'll say something like that. And they can say yes or no. And I try to leave it very open-ended, because whatever great ideas I might have, they're the parent, and just having that respect for their position can go a long way, I think. And that's the kind of respect I would hope someone would have for me, even though I try to appreciate advice wherever it comes from, however it comes. I appreciate it for what it is, and then take it or leave it, So yes, but I agree. And I appreciate your thoughts on how to deal with these different issues of parenting, where we don't have a guidebook, but we come in contact with these situations all the time. So it's been an interesting conversation, looking at life based on our expectations, and then the reality of parenting for me, just these few months, and for you, these 20 years. Can you believe it?
I cannot. I cannot.
It's amazing. So, wow, just think, B will be 21 day, Lord willing, and I'll get to look back and maybe share notes with you on how things went. So the question of the day, the question for this topic of expectations in parenting is this. So as a parent, what expectation did you have, good or bad, positive or negative, that did not come to pass? We're asking you this, listeners. And if you plan to have children, what expectations do you have? Or if you don't plan to have children, do expectations play a role in that decision not to have children? So again, as a parent, what expectation did you have that did not come to pass? If you plan to have children, but you don't yet, what expectations do you have? And if you don't plan to have children, do expectations play a role in that decision? And we'll put that question in the show notes, and we'd love to see your comments and have a conversation about that. But for me as a parent, I'll just add to what we've already shared. I expected to have a lot of fun with B day to day, fun with things like learning and musical sorts of fun. And I think that was a good expectation. It felt very positive, but it's much harder to squeeze those moments in to the day than I expected. And so, yeah, that's one expectation that did not come to pass the way I hoped so far, but maybe soon.
Yeah, I will say, I think I expected if you put in A, you will get out B. And parenting is definitely not a straight line. And so that's kind of what I've come to realize is you can't, because you do one thing, you can't automatically assume that you're going to get a certain outcome. And you have to be okay with that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Very wise words again, Bethany. Thank you for sharing that. So to wrap up today's episode, I invite you, listener, to email us at changingrhythmspodcast@gmail.com to tell us your answer to today's question, or leave your response there in the comments. And again, the question is, as a parent, what expectation did you have that did not come to pass? Or if you are not yet a parent but plan to be, what expectations do you have? And if you don't plan to have children, do expectations play a role in that decision? And next time we'll discuss relationship changes in parenthood. So go ahead and share your thoughts. We'd love to hear from you, and we look forward to exploring more with you. So keep listening and stay healthy and safe until then.